Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar on engaging African youth in agribusiness in a changing climate. We are excited to know that we have participants from all over the world, including countries such as Niger, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, the United Kingdom, Belgium, Italy, Rwanda, Somalia, the Gambia, Nigeria, and so many more. So we are pleased that you've joined us, and we look forward to your participation. In addition, we have representatives from various organizations, such as the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency, the Association for Women Empowerment in Cameroon, the Young Professionals for Agricultural Development, CSAYN University, Catholic University of Central Africa, African Enterprise Challenge Fund, and also IITA, FAO, and ATF, amongst others. So we are very pleased that we have diverse participants, and we look forward to getting different views and recommendations from the different experts that we have attending. So this webinar is a culmination of a month-long online discussion, which was organized by the CGIAR Research Program on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, that is CCAFS, the CGIAR Research Program on Livestock, the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network, CSAYN, AgriProFocus, and ICCO Cooperation. And the discussion commenced on World Youth Skills Day, that's on 15th July, and ended on the International Youth Day on 12th August. And this discussion explored the challenges and opportunities for engaging youth in agribusiness in a changing climate. So basically, as a wrap-up to the online discussion, this webinar will discuss novel opportunities for the youth, the practitioners, policymakers, scientists and technical experts, and other stakeholders emerging in the discussion, and provide an impetus towards developing a framework for concrete youth engagement in agribusiness within the context of a changing climate. So as you can see on the screen there, hopefully you can all see the screen, the webinar will be focused on the following questions. What examples of innovative youth-led agribusiness exist in Africa, and what challenges do they face in a changing climate? How can agribusiness drive innovation in CSA to combat climate change and attract the youth? What policies and programs should governments put in place to facilitate the involvement of youth in agribusiness? And what approaches and opportunities exist for scaling up the adoption of innovative youth climate smart agribusiness opportunities across Africa? So during this webinar, we shall have 3 presentations, which will be followed by an interactive question and answer session. And we look forward to hearing from you. So kindly take notes of any questions that you have and direct them to the specific speakers as they make their presentations. So our first speaker will be Divine Ntiokam, and he will be setting the scene and speaking about the African perspective on youth engagement in climate smart agriculture. So Divine, the floor is now yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carrie, for this interesting introduction. Hi everybody, Divine is my name. As she earlier on said, I'm the founder for CSAYN. We are currently based in 28 countries. I'm very active as well as far as CSA mainstreaming among youth is concerned. Yeah, so we have there on the content we have about us, our mission, vision, what CSA activities, results, and some countries of action. Next slide. Hello. Yeah. So yeah, as you said, it consists of a group of very active volunteers across the world. Currently, we are in 20 countries, even though the slide says 19, but we just got Madagascar added to it, and it's been very hectic back in 2014, where we got the Inception program. So it consists of it has very crucial objective to create awareness and sensitize, build productivity capacity young people among people with disabilities. And our vision is, as you can see right there, empowering youth in CSA knowledge, incorporating sustainability in decision making, creating dialogues towards stress opportunities in climate change and agriculture, raise awareness among youth contribution that they are to make agriculture a better sector for a sustainable future. And then the last one, we are equally very much engaged in contributing to livestock, fisheries, and agriculture. And our target group is 18 to 35, looking at the child policy, and we are there equally working with institutions, relevant government ministries as well. Next slide. Yeah, what CSA presents from the generic definition. Oh my God. Yeah, it presents a sustainable alternative. Yeah, alternative to adapt or mitigate climate change. It promotes production substance that sustainably increase productivity, resilience, reduce greenhouse gases, enhance food security and development goals. Considerable knowledge, invest, and stakeholder participation is required to effectively implement CSA. Next slide, please. Yeah, some of the activities, I won't go right here. I will rather move straight to some of the key actions on the ground. Yeah, actually, we've been working in establishing national forums and lobbying for youth engagement CSA, organized by annual youth conferences, which has not yet been done. That's still something to be done. In fact, a level of creating social media, we've been able to do a lot in that. That's why we'll be able to move on with this group discussion online with CCAFS back in 2015 and today again. So looking at showcasing, we have been doing that in so many international meetings and equally trying to design farmer field schools with the FAO concept. Next slide. Yeah, expected results. Yeah, we have 1 to 4 of the expected results. Increase understanding of CSA and crucial role of youth in promoting CSA. CSA's integrated education system, interrelated schools, colleges, clubs, throughout activities in local gardens, farms, and forest garden. Also potential activities within forest and forestry industries. Developing CSA country-specific report on activities and recommendations, increase awareness and raise youth with personal disabilities in CSA's related issues. Next slide. Yeah, some country actions there. You can find Rwanda. Don't mind, guys. You're gonna have the PowerPoint presentation. Due to time constraint, I'll be very fast. They have Rwanda during some partnership discussions with young people across the nation in a village, in partnership with SOS and other stakeholders. Next slide, please. Yeah, here in Ghana, they're actually carrying out some activities in creating awareness on SDGs, especially as far as climate action is concerned, SDG 13, and equally seeing how to get a sustainable future. Next slide. Yeah, we have tree planting, which equally addresses SDG 13 and education. Nigeria, yeah, we have the SDG, you have the farms right there, you have the launch right on the fourth picture under there, and then you have the farmland activities where 200 youths were trained. Yeah, you have the Togo was actually represented the GC with a global contribution of CSAYN in Benin during the African Climate Forum back in I think June. Yeah, this is Zimbabwe in some discussions as well, where 800 young people were actually trained to understand SDG 13. Next slide. Yeah, this is the COP where this is actually Morocco. They actually they took part in the COP and actually have been able to train 220 youths as of now on SDGs in Morocco, in Northern Africa, and there is with the unique country director. Yes, DRC in action on the field. Next slide. Yeah, some of the challenges, which is very, very key. I think we can stay here the whole of our lives. Lack of funding to implement our activities, lack of capacity. So that's why we are moving forward into working closely with IFAD as far as funding mechanism is concerned, FAO and other institutions. Then the capacity, we are discussing with CCAFS to see how they can equally with some of the CGIAR to build the capacity and access of land. That's why we are trying to bridge the gap between governments and smallholder farmers, and then access to market roads. I mean, this is equally something we are trying to do with some of the AIN initiatives that are upcoming as far as agribusiness is concerned. Next slide. Yeah, thank you very much. These are some of our partners, as you find there. So we have a whole lot of bulk of partners. So if your logo is lacking, don't be upset. We couldn't get everybody on board. So I thank you very much for this great opportunity to share what we've been able to do so far. And I want to underscore here that all these achievements have been done on voluntary basis. Each of these country coordinators have been somehow supportive to get this done. Thank you very much.
All right, CSAYN, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation and for letting us know what CSAYN is doing all over Africa. And we look forward to receiving even practical examples about what the youth in Mali, in Nigeria, in Rwanda, what they are doing in terms of agribusiness in the context of a changing climate. Just to all the participants, kindly send us your questions, and towards the end of the session, we're going to address them. Send them through the chat option, which is on your screen. So our next presenter is going to be Victor Essendi from AgriProFocus, and he'll be talking about career and business opportunities in CSA for youth in Africa. He will elaborate more about himself and what AgriProFocus does. So Victor, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and some are good morning, right? Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone from Nairobi. It's a pleasure to attend this webinar on engaging African youth in agribusiness in a changing climate. I come from an organization called AgriProFocus, which is a network membership organization that has roots in Netherlands, formed in 2005, and seeks to bring players within the agri-food sector to discuss issues to do with climate smart agriculture, circular economies like food waste, post-harvest losses, inclusive agriculture, among others. Now, when we talk about the career opportunities, career and business opportunities that exist in that CSA offers to African youth, we perhaps need to contextualize. Like right now, currently the world population is at 7.6 billion. We expect by 2050 to hit 9.8 billion. That means we're going to have an additional 2.4 billion. And of these, 1.3 billion will be on African continent. And on a continent that we have about 10 to 12 million entering the workforce every year without much success, it means we really have to think about new ways of either creating opportunities or expanding the existing opportunities. Now, agriculture offers, away from climate smart agriculture, agriculture itself offers opportunities right along the value chain. But then this is further complicated by the reality that is climate change, which means we have to always think about now, how can we be climate smart? And indeed, I think this offers the African continent an opportunity to continue with production, because ideally, globally, we're still talking about 800 million who are still not fed or who don't have sufficient food. So from where we sit, and we work with a lot of these institutions, organizations working in the agriculture sector, we see a number of opportunities, both business and career. First, the opportunities that exist in terms of production at the production stage. And this has been argued has not been very attractive to youth. But then this is changing because of new ways of farming and those kind of things. But secondly, there are opportunities that also exist along the value chain in terms of processing, in terms of distribution. But one of the bigger opportunity that exists in terms of when we're looking at climate smart agriculture, perhaps, then is the provision of support services. If we're going to be climate smart, it means either you have to adapt new smart water approaches. It means probably you're doing drip irrigation and those kind of things. It means that there is an opportunity for even African youth who are not interested to do on-farm activities to take up other support services that are really needed to make climate smart agriculture a success. So we see also climate smart agriculture as an opportunity for African youth to innovate and ensure that there is continuous supply. Of course, with climate change, it means now the seasons are becoming erratic, yet the population will still need food to eat. So it means thinking about, for instance, what are the technologies that we can use to preserve food and ensure that we're able to supply to the market. These are opportunities that will exist for the youth. What are the opportunities that exist, for instance, when you're looking at, first of all, okay, there is preservation of food, but also production within an off-season. And right now with SNV, who we partner with and is our member, has been demonstrating, for instance, the use of shade nets in agriculture. So away from even the greenhouses, which has been argued at times in certain areas might be expensive for people, but for instance, shade nets. So I think being climate smart offers opportunity to continually increase production or continue supplying to the market in times when either climatic conditions would not allow for normal production or for seasonal production of that. So I think there, where I sit from, we see this in terms of the different bits in terms of production, processing, support services, distribution, and other innovations that could come along the way. Thank you.
Right.
I did finish my time.
Thank you very much, Victor. That was a very interesting presentation. And one thing I picked from Victor is that 800 million people are not food secure in the world. So that means we have quite a lot of work to do as young people so that we can feed everybody. And also he talked about the fact that the young people can play different roles in the value chain. So apart from production, they can also be involved in transport and in marketing. But then we need to explore further how we can really engage them in how to participate in the different entry points. So after Victor, we now have Wouter from ILRI, and he'll be speaking about the policies and programs to facilitate the involvement of youth in agribusiness. He'll tell you a little bit more about himself and what he does. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for this invitation by CCAFS. It's an honor. I only have 10 minutes, which means that I have to be really short, but I'll give it a try and try to say as much useful things as possible, and then maybe we have some time in the discussion to elaborate on some things. So yeah, the topic, well, let me indeed introduce myself briefly. My name is Wouter Klein. I work for the International Livestock Research Institute, and really what I try to do is on a daily basis help them set up a youth strategy. In other words, in the livestock sector, how do we engage young people? So today I'll talk a little bit about policies and programs to facilitate the involvement of youth in agribusiness. And I want to, before becoming a bit more practical, I want to ask a few questions or try to answer a few questions, maybe take a little bit of a sort of a higher level perspective on this youth. On this topic of youth, which is really high on the development agenda nowadays. And so basically I want to go through three questions. First is, should we involve more youth? Should we be concerned with engaging more youth in agriculture. Why should we ask that question? We want to ask that question because I think, well, what I notice in my daily work is often resistance. That a lot of people say, oh, first is what gender, and now we're going to do youth. What are you guys talking about, and what is different about it? So I think and that's a legitimate question. So I think we need to be prepared if we are going to be effective and push our proposals forward, that we have an answer to that question. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then okay, so if we want to involve youth, what is then different about youth compared to youth from previous generations, or maybe the elderly? Are they really different? And that can help us to also to have a better idea of how we should engage these young people, of course. And then the last question is how can we involve youth? So a bit more practical, and how can we do that in a cost-effective manner? Because you can train 5 youth and spend a lot of resources, but is that scalable? Right? We talk about scalability in development all the time, and so we should also discuss that when it comes to youth. And so yes, I will leave out maybe a little bit government policies and all that stuff because it's a lot to cover in just a few minutes. So the first question, should we involve more youth? Now, there's some legitimate arguments from people who would say no, because agriculture is risky and a lot of youth are not really interested. So why would we push them into something they don't want to do? It's a legitimate question. Some other people would ask, they would argue that scale increases in agriculture, especially scale increases in sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at the increase in medium scale production, medium-sized farms, sorry, there is, you could make the argument that this will offset some of the problems people see with food security. Yeah? So the increase in productivity by these big farms or bigger farms can actually address food security issues, and so we don't need those youth. And they can also take up they also don't maybe necessarily need all that labor. And then some other people would argue, no, population growth will be significant enough to offset all the youth that are migrating to the cities. A lot of people would argue they're very worried about young people moving to the cities. They're not interested in agriculture anymore. What will happen? But with the population growth we're currently witnessing, I think we don't have to be worried that rural areas will be completely vacant. So these are some of the arguments that I hear from colleagues when I talk to them about youth. They say, well, maybe we should think twice. I disagree. I think these arguments hold value, but you know, in the end, there are some more important arguments I think that lead us to do something on youth. And also, if you, for example, look at population growth, yes, it is an issue. It is true that there will be still a lot of people in the rural areas, but it doesn't mean that all those young people will be necessarily involved in agriculture and that they can make a good living out of it. So even if they're there, and even if there will be more people in the rural areas, doesn't mean that they will improve their livelihoods necessarily, right? So yeah, I would argue that there is an issue of too many youth with too few jobs in the urban areas, and this eventually will lead, if we are not careful, to violence. That is also why, for example, in the elections, Kenyan elections, a lot of politicians talk about youth, not necessarily because they care so much, but because they're very afraid, I think, about what's about to happen. But also in terms of the economy. I just noted consumer expenditure here, but there's in many ways that unemployment prohibits economic development, of course. And then there's the argument of the multiplier effect, that if you raise productivity, and you will need young people to do so because they will be in some countries already 40–50% of the rural population. If you want to increase productivity, if you increase productivity, this will lead to demand in the urban areas. There will be more jobs, and so the whole economy, this whole machine starts to work. So yes, I think we should involve more youth. But these are some of the discussions I've been having, and I think it's important to prepare ourselves for these discussions in order to push our issue forward. So the next question. So what about these young people? Are they then very different? Quite often also with my colleagues, especially colleagues of 40, 50 and beyond, they say, yeah, but young people, there's the same challenges and then we need the same solutions. Well, first I would say that there's huge differences among youth. So we often have the tendency to talk about youth as if it's this uniform concept, which of course does not make a lot of sense. That's a huge difference between, let's say, a 19-year-old girl living in the suburbs of Ghana and a 33-year-old guy living in the rural areas, in pastoral community in Kenya, for example. It's such an enormous difference, and so sometimes it just doesn't make sense to talk about youth as if they're all the same. Second point would be that yes, there's I think quite some evidence that some of the challenges that we face in agriculture, they apply to both youth and elderly people, right? So this is a FAO report, it says 2015, I think it's maybe 2014, which identifies some of these classic bottlenecks that prohibit agricultural development. It's knowledge, it's land, finance, markets, policy, all these kind of things, the sort of usual suspects. And this report is about young people, but I think if you would have talked about 35 years old and beyond, these things would have also applied. So I don't think that necessarily the challenges for young people are always different. There are some differences, and it is, well, climate change, for example. I think that makes agriculture more knowledge intensive, more difficult. My colleague from AgriProFocus talked about the opportunities, but I also see a lot of challenges, actually. I think it makes agriculture, if I'm really honest, less attractive than it already was. And sure, there are some opportunities, but in general, it makes it more knowledge intensive. And that is different compared to a generation before. Another difference is there's less land available because there's more people, and also an increase in life expectancy. People in Kenya, for example, in the last 15 years, life expectancy went from 51 to 63.4 in 15 years. That's unbelievable. That means that land will become available to youth at a later stage in their life, and by that time they might have already dropped out of agriculture. And then youth are, of course, more aware of alternatives as well. They see on their mobile phone, they see on television that there's other lives out there, other possibilities. There is urbanization, there are opportunities in the cities that were not there before. There are bodas. And then last but not least, a lot of people would talk that, and actually youth themselves as well, oh, we are lazy, or we want to make money so we can buy a mobile phone. In other words, youth are maybe more concerned about labor intensity and their incomes than previous generations. I put some question marks there because I don't think there's a lot of evidence on that, and that would be something to research. But it is something you always hear when you go into the field. Youth are lazy, even from the youth themselves. I'm not so sure if that's the case. I think it has more to do with the very rational calculation by young people that there are other alternatives, and that agriculture, when they look at their parents, is often a very complicated thing to do. But anyway, that's a discussion we could have. Last question. So, knowing all of this, how can we then involve young people? And I would start by saying there's no blueprint solution. I think there's many very important development scholars who already concluded this about development in general. There's no blueprint solution. There's no one way to go about this. And so there's also no one way to go about this for young people. And that is often a distressing answer to give when people ask me, so this youth problem, how do we solve it? And then I first give an answer, well, it's very complicated. It's very complicated. And then I see their attention span is already getting shorter. But I think it is the truth. So a couple of suggestions. Again, I would say addressing some of what I call the usual suspects that the FAO then also identified at the maybe meso level, but also at the macro level. Infrastructure, corruption, foreign direct investment, an education system that is geared towards more technical education than getting a degree, which will not get you a job. I think is still very important, and that is not youth specific, but it also concerns youth. And again, because some of the issues that youth are facing are the same as adults or elderly people. Then at the micro level, explore opportunities with public-private partnerships, contract farming arrangements, capital provision. As I think there's mounting evidence that just training people by itself does not help a lot. So there's interesting research on cash transfers with some training. And you probably will start focusing on young people closer to the markets, closer to the urban centers. A couple of weeks ago, we had some people visiting here at ILRI who wanted to work with youth in the dry areas of Kenya, northern Kenya, and they were looking at thousands of jobs for young people. That is very difficult. That is very complicated. But it does raise the question of inclusiveness. If we focus on the young people close, in the peri-urban areas, a lot of young people will miss out. So how do we address this? That is definitely an issue I think we don't necessarily have an answer to. Supporting existing youth entrepreneurs, the people who know how to do it, who have shown enthusiasm, try to make them scale up. Maybe they will employ some other youth people and they serve as an example. So identify them and try to help them to increase their business. A couple of weeks ago I was in Uganda looking at the pig value chain. There was a guy who set up an abattoir, for example. Or maybe he can set up another abattoir. And all his staff was young people as well. My colleague from AgriProFocus also mentioned this. We should also pay attention to value-adding services, so not just primary production. At the same time, there's a cost-effectiveness issue, because value-adding, there's only so many people who can transport milk, for example, from one place to the other, and so many people who can maybe slaughter a cow. So if we want to reach a certain scale and we include the value-adding services, then that might become expensive in terms of training. But I think, yeah, sure, we should include also services and not just primary production. Last slide. So what does that mean? So I think, and this is not easy to say because I work for a research institute, I think there's a limited role only for research. I don't think we have to do tons of research on young people, because I think, like I said, there's some of the issues are still the same challenges that we already know, and also because the solutions are highly context specific. So you would do research, but in the context of a project setting, so a value chain analysis or an ex-ante study to look at what would be the, let's say a young woman is going to make money in this project, what will happen to her in her household? This was also in Uganda. We noticed that a lot of young people were interested in pig farming, but they only had 3 pigs. And by the time they had the 4th one, they would sell it off. So can we develop, do a cost-benefit analysis of what it means to have 10 pigs and show them that they can actually make money if they invest in feeding and then maybe transform this into a practical manual. I think there's also a modest role for ICT. You put a picture here of a young farmer with a mobile phone, because whenever you bring up young people, they will always bring into, always talk about ICT. And I think ICT brings enormous opportunities. But I think we have to be a bit modest. If we talk about ICT as a business opportunity, there's only a few young people who will be able to build an app and make money off it, if at all. And then in terms of a delivery scheme, yes, I think ICT is very useful. But most of the ICT initiatives are still donor funded and not self-sufficient. And so I don't see that as a game changer necessarily right now, maybe in the future. I mentioned climate change. I think it's more of a challenge than always an opportunity. But I'd love to have a debate on this as well, because I'm sure there's some people who disagree on that. And like I said, re-emphasizing what I said before, not all interventions need to be youth specific when they want to include young people. If you have a very big program focusing on, well, let's take the Uganda example again, on primary production of pigs. You don't necessarily need to focus only on young people. You can include all. because the solutions and the challenges are somewhat the same. It could be that your outreach efforts would be a bit different, your monitoring might be a bit different, your training might be a bit different, but it doesn't necessarily always merit a completely different overhaul of the typical development intervention, in my opinion. Yeah, I think that's it for now. Thank you, guys.
So thank you very much, Walter. That was a very, very provocative presentation. You raised the question of, is agriculture less attractive? And I think that is something very, very important that we need to discuss. And also you talked about the fact that with government, they give a lot of lip service to the issue of youth engagement. But then how can we move from, just talking about youth, but to make it more practical? And then you also raised the issue of the fact that youth are not uniform. So the youth are different in different parts of Africa, in different parts of the world, even in urban areas and rural areas. You'll find that the youth will have different technologies and skills, and even in terms of access to resources. So to our participants, thank you very, very much. You can see some questions and comments coming in. Fatuma and John says that climate smart opportunities, how can we make them more sustainable? How can we ensure that the youth engage in climate smart business? I believe one of our speakers will respond to that. And so for those who are having technical issues, I hope we'll be able to address them. Keep your questions coming in. So at this particular moment, I want to hand over to Alpha Gitao from ICCO Cooperation. He will be addressing the issues coming from the floor and also share a little bit about what their organization is doing to address the issue of youth.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm not sure I was given the chance to address issues, but let me say it's indeed a pleasure to be here. Sitting here as an employee of ICCO Cooperation as a program manager, but also from a practical perspective, I'm a young farmer as well. I would like to view myself as a young expert on youth in agri. But I think so far so good. This is really a good discussion that is already going on, and I applaud all the organizers for this. And I think to start with, I think I will ask one of the panelists who was there before, Victor. This is a question that comes from the floor on, could you please share any practical engagement that AgriProFocus has been able to do with regards to youth in agriculture?
Okay, perhaps a starting point. AgriProFocus does not implement, and as such, we are engaged more in terms of trying to either help share lessons or even bring a multi-stakeholder discussion around the issue of youth in agribusiness, and then specifically in a changing climate. Now, I would give an example, perhaps, that specifically, I think, increasingly we're seeing young people who are getting into agriculture and engaging in, and some of them are taking up interesting things. For instance, when we had a partner we're working with who mentioned that there is a young lady who is now interested in doing vanilla. So we are increasingly seeing partners or young people who are taking things that are not traditionally thought of and putting them into practice. And some also have tried to look at, for instance, in terms of fish farming. We've seen, for instance, in areas around the central part of Kenya, many more young people taking up interesting approach in terms of producing fish in their homes through ponds at home. So I think for me, there are a number of examples, practical examples that exist, but of course, some of these people at times young people engaging in them as just part of it. But then we are now again seeing increasingly young people who are also in gainful employment leaving gainful employment to go and venture into agriculture, which for sure it means there has to be some opportunity in it. For instance, if I'm assured of a monthly pay, then I have to leave that employment and go full time into agriculture. So, for instance, the case of Alpha, leaving his full time ICCO Cooperation job to concentrate fully in agriculture, it means there is some opportunity in there. So I think there are examples that are existing, and I think even all over as you look around you, there will be a young person doing something in agriculture, but at times someone might not look at it as a business or as an economically viable thing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Victor. I think we have a few more questions that probably would be good for you, but we'll come back to that. I'd like to take a question from Nana, and thanks so much for the question. And I think this will go to Wouter, one of us, who was talking about how to ensure that government support really goes to the right channels and really passes through the right people and get support the right projects. Is there anything that you've done towards that, or?
Yeah, so basically I have the honor to answer the question, how can we prevent corruption? Which is a very complicated thing, right? Favoritism. I think it's a very good question. Yeah, so I made a joke, but it's a very honest and very good question, because we see this happening, I think, across in Uganda and Kenya. There's some youth funds available for youth, and we all know the stories, what happens to these funds, right? We also know politicians talking about young people. They talk about creating jobs, but in the end, do they really know how to create jobs? I don't think they do. I don't think most people and most politicians do, actually. It's not an easy matter. Yes, I think there's still things you can do, but I would argue for more of a bottom-up approach, which is not to say that we need improved politics and checks on favoritism, nepotism, and all that. But some of the things that I mentioned, like supporting young entrepreneurs, I think you can still do without necessarily getting rid of favoritism, right? So I think you can still try to work with youth that show some interest in agriculture and try to scale up their business, and that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, sure.
Great. Sorry. Yeah. So thank you so much, Wouter. I think I'll go in a point to that point that you just mentioned. I think it's important for government to actually get young people engaged in designing this project and designing which channels do actually this money go to. And a good example for me, I'll say, is the Youth Enterprise Development Fund has had for the longest time been saying that we have actually leftover money the previous year not being consumed by young people in entrepreneurship. But then also you look at their products don't match what young people are really looking for. For example, if you tell me as a young poultry farmer to take a loan that binds me to just getting an incubator, yet that's not my core business in the poultry industry, then that for me doesn't work. It doesn't address my challenges. So I think it's important to really engage young people in designing these products and trying to ask them, what do you need for you to be able to be supported? So, which I think has really been lacking even in terms of research.
So basically you're saying one way to address this question of favoritism is by involving more youth in designing the policy itself.
Yes.
That's a very interesting take, and I think that's you say, yeah, that makes sense, because we've all been there to the Youth Enterprise Fund, and there's many equivalents in the countries where some of the participants of this call are from. They say there's some money available, but we don't know where it ends up. I think another issue, though, is that sometimes there's willing people on the ground, but ironically, they might have the funds to provide youth with financial support, and you say it's not flexible enough, the modalities, and I agree with you. But sometimes they don't have the funds to actually give technical support, and just giving money by itself is not always very effective either, right? So
yeah, I think that's a very interesting point whereby we're saying, is money the solution to all our problems in engaging with agribusiness, which I think is not. There are many other things, but anyway.
And sorry, you make a very critical point that, and I keep asking myself, are youth engaged or involved in discussions about them? Yeah. So most of the time you'll find people who do not understand what the youth need, and these are the people who are making policies, who are making interventions about the youth. And then, I mean, like the case of poultry, is it of interest to me?
Yeah, great. I think in the interest of time, I think I'll like to throw some questions to Divine from the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. There are two questions for you. What are some of the opportunities for addressing the challenges you mentioned? For example, the issue of land. How can young people address this? And secondly is, you mentioned that CSAYN is an online platform. So how can we engage as young people? How can young people get engaged or get access to actually your youth online platform?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alpha, and thanks very much for this, critical question. Yeah, the first thing I'll answer, I'll start by answering the last one, how to get engaged with CSAYN. You just have to go to, if you PowerPoint if you show the slide, the last slide, you just go to info@csayn.org. They can send a request right there, and they will be able to address, attend to them. So, yeah, the last slides.
I can't share it.
Yeah, there's this. I can share it here if you want. You have the website, official website is right there, and then they just send an email to info@csayn.org. We'll be able to respond to them. Yeah, or contact me directly on my email. That's another option. Yeah, then we'll be able to address their requests. And connect them with the country teams as well. Then the next question was on land policy issue. We're doing our very best to connect with the governments. Recently, I just came back from the AU for a high-level meeting, AU EBA on the vet governance closing meeting, where we had all parliamentarians right there at the AUC. So I was able to give a presentation, and that's where we're launching CSAYN Ethiopia. So a lot of governments committed, and all of the parliamentarians actually went back with some of our contacts and are very, very willing to join efforts with our country coordinators in countries already moving forward with CSAYN, and those who are not or still to establish. So at that level, we have very, very high policy recommendations, and we just need the young people to get themselves available. We just need people to give access to some of their time, like 5-10 minutes a day, to devote on that, and then things are going to roll out. To add to one of the, to second what I'm saying, right? Recently, we got some money for CSAY in South Africa to leverage the SDG global goals in local languages, which of course they're actually going on now. It's going to run right up to December, and we are equally. I think at that level we have a lot of policy support and technical team working on that, so it shouldn't be a problem. We are trying to move the pyramid. The bottom-top approach rather than the top-bottom approach. So that's what we are actually doing right now. So we are very, very excited and open to share more light on that.
Okay, thanks so much, Divine. And I think that's interesting. And for anyone who would like to get involved, just write to Divine and then get back to you. There are two comments that are very interesting from the participants. And one is from Grace, and another one is from Caroline from the Food and Business Knowledge Platform. And I think one is, I'd like to give at least 2 minutes to each of the two. And Grace, kindly, because you said you are in disagreement with Wouter saying we don't need more research. And I think it would be nice to hear your perspective on the same. So if you have 2 minutes, please. They can talk. Okay, none of them can talk. Okay, sorry. Then I'd like to throw it back to the room and say, and give Catherine an opportunity to respond to those two questions. And maybe also Victor can respond to the question by Caroline. What are some of the lessons that are coming out from your work on youth in agribusiness that we need to also take into perspective? And so Catherine, you can share much of what CCAFS is doing with youth, and how does that also inform research, and how can that be part of research?
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Alpha, and also Grace, for raising the issue of why it is important to engage with the youth in terms of research. And this is also builds on what Alpha said. When you're developing policies, you need to get the voice of the youth as to what it is that they want, what it is that they have been involved in, and what it is that they think that they would be interested in undertaking. So, for example, CCAFS, East Africa, has been working with the youth in what we call the climate smart villages in one of our villages called Nyando. And we've been working with them to test a couple of, CSA practices and technologies, and this includes the production of production of tomatoes and green beans through greenhouses. And this gives us the opportunity to engage with the youth from the aspect of production through to harvesting, marketing, preservation, transport, and also marketing. So these are some of the initiatives that we're already doing on the ground. And when we talk about upscaling or integration into policy, these are some of the things that we can include. The youth are also involved in terms of climate information services. So you can work together with the youth to develop apps that can be used to share information with farmers, and also for to enhance the feedback loop. So the farmers can also communicate directly, whether it's with the Met services or whether it's with the NGOs or the research institutions that are providing them with technologies. So I believe that there are a lot of opportunities where we can work with the youth, even in terms of agroforestry, irrigation, fish farming. So, but as Walter said, maybe they are not interested. So we just have to see how can agriculture be presented as an interesting opportunity for youth engagement. Thank you.
Victor, kindly, 2 minutes. Just from Caroline's question, I think mention a few insights that we need to we can learn from your work with youth, and maybe what we can be able to maybe put in terms of projects and proposals. Yeah.
Okay. Certainly, from where we sit as AgriProFocus, first of all, I would respond to the question about do we need more research, but then I start by asking myself, have the existing research findings been shared widely to make impact? So perhaps we need to start from the point that existing research should be shared, because most of the time you find research has just an organization does its own research, or say CCAFS has research, but then it's not shared in the wider domain. So AgriProFocus offers this particular opportunity, particular space where we can, through some of the activities we undertake through an interactive online system, you can be able to come and share some of the experiences that you have. Annually in Kenya, we have the annual network day for AgriProFocus, which is a space for institutions and individuals in the agri-food sector to come and share a network. So those, for me, I think, first of all, we need to be able to share, because climate smart agriculture, first of all, is very site specific. What works in one area might not work necessarily in another area. Meaning, therefore, if these lessons have been the lessons from one area, we perhaps need to get a forum or an opportunity to share, and then someone would think, can I scale? Now, specifically on the question on some of the things that we're doing, we now we have our upcoming network day in 2017 in November 15th, and we actually intentionally and purposely having a session on how we can engage more youth in climate smart agriculture. And this will be a continuity to this discussion, to the online, to the webinar, and more to face-to-face interaction. But we are also looking at how we can then bring investors together to promote agribusiness, investment, and networking and trade among youth. So this will be very specific for youth, and I think in the coming years, this will be something that then we can see how youth have been able to have been assisted intentionally and moved from farming as maybe subsistence or a part-time to farming as a business, and bearing in mind climate change and those other issues.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Victor. I think we have very few minutes to wind up. I think I'd like to just wrap it up and mention that, one, we will share the presentations that have been done from all the presenters. That's one. Secondly, I think any pending questions will be addressed on blog, and they'll get in touch with you. We'll get in touch with you and answer those questions. But I think as I wrap up, I think I would like to bring in a few key points. And one for me is, like what I said, I think we need to reinterrogate how we conduct our research. I think we need to find a way of conducting research that engages young people themselves. I think, thank you, Grace, for the research that you've been doing, and I think you're continuing to do more research. And I think, as Victor says, we need to find a way to put that research into implementation. That's number one. Number two, I think, I've seen some of you mention, I think it's important for us to, as development partners and as private sector and as governments, we need to focus on young people who have taken agribusiness as a choice by themselves. I don't think it's important to actually get every young person into agriculture, because I don't think we have the capacities, all of us, and I don't think we have the interest, all of us. I think it's important for us to kind of get some focus and support those who are already doing it, and make them and kind of capture their stories outside there and make them being emulated by other people. So let's try and find a way of how to focus. And our points that will support that, I think it's important to find a way to engage young people. When we talk about public-private partnerships, how do we have young people very key in that discussion? Because I think for the longest time ever, they have not been engaged. It's been private sector trying to work on with the development sector and government on designing youth projects, but young people themselves are not asked the questions of how do you like these projects engaged. And I think another question is, I think there was one question of how do you grow your business in terms of addressing the challenges like access to finance. I believe from my own perspective is that we need to start small. You can never be a multinational company within a day. So I think we need to start small and start growing the business from the lowest point of the chain. As you grow up and as you get access to much more of these resources, but I think it's also good to find a way of being innovative as young people. How can you lease land from people who have it and are not using it? That's one. I think I know of a lady right now in Kenya who is connecting young people with the older generation of people who have access to land but they're not using it, and leasing them to the young people. So she's bridging that gap between people who have access to land but they're not using it and the young people who need that land at a very cheaper cost. So those kind of things need to be brought out outside there for young people to be able to engage in. And I think my last but not the least point, I think we need to look at how do we as young people engage within structures. And I think most of the time I speak as alpha, but how do we support structures like YPAD or like CSAYN to be able to speak for the young people who are engaged in agriculture? I think we need to find a way to support those kind of structures and grow them and strengthen them, so that when they speak actually for a bigger community. They don't just speak for Dubai, they don't just speak for Alpha, they speak for a bigger community. The role of networks such as AgriProFocus need to be strengthened more to be able to support us as young people engaging in agribusiness. And lastly, I think it was such an interesting discussion. I think a lot has come out from this, and I would like to throw a challenge to the organizers, who is us, on trying to see how can we take this discussion further, how can we actually get things rolling out, how can we get practical projects on the ground rolling out. ILRI, AgriProFocus, ICCO, CCAFS, CSAYN, how do we get these things moving? How do we get to address these questions, just beyond questions, how do we work on them? And without further much to say, I think I would like to leave it there and throw it back to Catherine as she wraps it up. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
So thank you, Alpha, thank you, Wouter, Victor, and Divine for your participation in this webinar. But most of all, I would like to thank all our online participants. We had participants from very many institutions and very many countries, and I would just like to thank each and every one of you for participating and for sharing your views. Apart from questions, we've also received quite a number of examples of initiatives that you're all undertaking in your different countries and within your institutions. So as we wrap up, I'd just like to point out that yes, we shall also emphasize that we shall share the presentations that you've just seen. And this webinar has also been recorded, so we shall also circulate the recording. And we will be highlighting the issues in the online discussion and in the webinar in a blog story that we shall share with all the participants. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good day, good evening, good night, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you very much.